Here we are in the thick of the holiday season. It's Christmas Eve when this episode drops. And as Dr. Jen and I were reflecting on the year, one of the best gifts of this year has been this podcast that we were able to launch and talk with y'all about how to live better right now and in the long haul. And so for this episode, we're really just focusing on our number one idea. It's the end of the year. Everybody's super busy, but we're taking this time to pause and kind of underscore and amplify that the number one thing that you can do for yourself is to move. So this episode's about movement. And what we hope to do is have simplified the science. We all see so much out there on all of our different news feeds and social media feeds and cocktail conversations about this type of movement and that type of exercise. And so what we wanted to gather together and talk about is the simple science of what to do and why. So you don't want to get up in the morning and hit that alarm to snooze. You've got some of these whys crisp in your mind, and it's much bigger and beyond a bikini medicine and body comp. So the why for the movement, as well as the very simple, efficient, effective hows. Doesn't have to be a huge, heavy lift, even though we do talk about lifting heavy. So that's what we're talking about today. And we're so happy that we get to spend time with you on any time we're talking together, but especially today in the holiday season. The gift of your dialogue and your listenership is immense to us. So it's time.
Okay, so a deep dive on movement. I know we talked about this in our foundational episode, and if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, it might be fun to listen to before diving into this one. But because we say movement is number one, maybe we spend an entire episode on framing the components of movement.
Absolutely. First, can we explain our get-ups?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, because we do look cool today.
Yes, we do.
For those that can't see us, it looks like we're wearing some version of a life preserver. But these are weighted vests.
Yes. And two different styles of them, but both because yours is 20 right now? What's your weight?
20.
20. So yours is 20. And I've worn ones like this too. I find them a little bit harder on me for my lower back.
Fully buckled in.
Vested. This one is a new one I'm playing with. I don't know if you could probably see this, but it's got little dots everywhere, which almost makes it look like it could be a Halloween costume like the Transformers. I might double up for that.
You look really tough.
But it is dispersing the weight a little more evenly, but it's only 10 pounds. And that means it's just easier for me to not only work out in, but also walk around in the day-to-day if you're doing the laundry with a weighted vest, which you hear a lot about. We'll get into that in a minute. This brand also makes weighted leggings.
She looks really tough when she wears the whole get up.
And they also make weighted bicycle shorts and tank tops. So if people are trying to incorporate, which we'll talk about why, weighted things, there's a lot of menu options to choose from.
Absolutely. So we're going to get into this whole idea behind using weighted vests, rucking, et cetera, as we move through. But we just wanted to explain our get up as we get started here. It's easy to go super scientific and deep on a lot of this stuff, which I think is interesting from the background, but not crazy practical. Yeah. So let's introduce concepts. We'll go a little deep in a couple areas. When we have some of our guests on, we'll get real deep into these areas. But so we'll just kind of introduce the science behind what we're going to talk about, but still try to keep it at a practical level.
Yes. And one of the reasons why I so value when you introduce the science to me and to people who we're having this conversation with is sometimes it's hard to do these things. It's hard to fit them in your day. Even though it's not a lot, it's just a different rhythm. And so to have heard the science is part of my rationale or my catalyst to do it.
Yeah. And I think the science has taught us new things that are kind of defying our cultural norms and societal norms and kind of a lot of what women have been told over the years. If we look at historically how women have been educated to exercise, what we've learned probably in the last 10 years is that as we age, that's not as beneficial or as effective for us.
Right. I think one of the things that we hear a lot about from women who are in this midlife period is maybe before, unless they were athletes, maybe before hitting midlife, it was primarily about, I'm just going to say aesthetics. I'm just going to say it. It was like, I want to be, you call it bikini medicine sometimes, but it's also like bikini working out. And midlife becomes much more about longevity and energy and sustainability, but also appreciating body comp and the aesthetics are so important to many women. So
absolutely.
When we talk about these exercise categories, we're trying to ring the bell on both, hey, you're going to feel better, number one, so you can keep doing it. And you're also going to get the payoff that's the external feedback loop too. So, we're not trying to say let go of those early reasons for what you were doing, but we want to reconfigure so you get the energy boost as well.
Okay. So we're going to divide this into different quadrants because there is movement as a whole, which is kind of how you, almost more of a lifestyle
choice. It's a choice.
It's a choice.
Remembering that you need to move your whole day, right?
Your whole day. Yeah. And then there's exercise specific.
Okay.
So let's start with exercise specific. And so when we say, what is the best way for midlife women to influence their body composition, to maintain their lean muscle mass as we are losing estrogen's anabolic, and anabolic means building, losing estrogen's anabolic effects on our muscles?
Can I ask, just because I know we're going to go through all these categories, can I ask us to just lay out all the categories we're going to hit now, just so people, if they're listening, know to keep hanging on. We're going to get there. So we're going to hit exercise, specifically the exercise you should do. We're going to hit movement, which is just the way you look at a day. You should be moving every day. We talked about also hitting a myriad of things that really kind of center around stability, being able to balance, being able to stretch. That's a stability category. But you can't do any of those three if you don't really regard and respect with time allocation recovery.
Absolutely.
So those are the 4 categories we're going to get through.
Yep.
Okay. So exercise and the components of that.
Yes. So first of all, let's start with our types of exercise.
Okay.
So we have cardiovascular exercise, which we can divide into aerobic and anaerobic. So aerobic is our oxygen consuming exercise.
Okay.
So these are longer durations. These are engaging our type 1 muscle fibers, which are really oxidative. Those are our red muscle fibers, use a lot of oxygen, carbohydrate, protein, fat for fuel. And we can go a long time. Those are our endurance components.
Jogging, biking,
hiking, walking, all of that. When we hear a lot about zone 2, that is aerobic exercise.
Okay.
Then we have our anaerobic, which means without oxygen.
Okay.
So this is high intensity, very short duration periods of exercise. This is sprinting, jumping, lifting, all of those types of things that we can't sustain for very long.
Okay.
They engage our type 2 muscle fibers, which are A and B. A are kind of in the middle between our type 1 and type 2, and then 2B are really our anaerobic power muscle fibers. As we age, we lose those.
We lose those because they're also not stimulated with estrogen. Is that related, or what's
both? So men will lose them too.
Okay.
We just tend, and partly is because we tend to stop engaging in those types of activities that are needed to maintain those. We all have a different proportionality of type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers, which is why some people are very geared genetically to be better anaerobic performers. That's why some people are sprinters and high jumpers and all of those things. And other people are these amazing endurance athletes.
Okay.
But you can train those different fibers a little bit.
This is
maintain.
A totally kindergarten question, but are the fibers, they're like coexisting? So you've got A and B. You can't look at somebody and be like, oh, you've got big type 2.
Some people used to say that those big hypertrophied muscles, they have a lot more type 2. I don't know whether that's true.
Okay. So they're intermixed there, and we know when we're doing different exercises, we're stimulating different muscle fibers.
Correct.
And we stimulate those muscle fibers by if we're doing aerobic or anaerobic activity.
Correct.
That plugs in. Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
So then we have our resistance training, which sometimes puts us in an anaerobic capacity, but that's more, we're not as worried about the cardiovascular effects when we're doing resistance training.
Okay. So we have strength training, resistance training. We have aerobic exercise, which is kind of zone 2. And we have anaerobic exercise, which could be cardio as well.
Yeah.
And is that really the sprint interval training you're describing?
Yep. That would be more in our anaerobic. If you push it hard enough. I think that's, you have to cross what we're calling our VO2 max threshold. So you have to push hard enough that your body switches over in the metabolism and switches over in the type of exercise. So you can be sprinting and still be at that kind of high level aerobic VO2 max work, or you can push past that. So that's why when we get into what is anaerobic exercise, it is really short bursts till exhaustion.
Okay. So when I've been trying to do that myself, we talked about RPE on our foundational episode, rate of perceived exertion.
Correct.
I thought of that, for me, I thought it was more like an 8. Is that right?
So you're thinking 8 to 10.
8 to 10.
Yeah.
I mean, I almost feel like I'm having my insides stripped out when I'm at the end of the 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And people say, you should do sprints for 3 minutes. I can't hold a sprint for 3 minutes.
No.
I can't do that.
No. when we really talk about true sprint interval training, we're talking 30 seconds
30
or less.
seconds. Okay.
And you shouldn't be able to go longer.
Okay.
Like you should be done.
And you're done. And then you need a full minute to minute and a half to recover.
At least, sometimes 3 to 4.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So that's the sprint interval training. So that is in the category of exercise. One of the things that I found so freeing about understanding movement in these 4 different blocks is that exercise doesn't have to be 2 hours a day. Right? No. Exercise is 30 minutes, maybe 45. And depending upon if you're trying to just have a big zone 2 one day, that might be longer. But when you look at trying to put this all in your calendar, it's not an overwhelming amount of time to do effective exercise for both longevity and body comp goals. Is that
correct?
Right?
And I think, I do want to say, like, you can be in an aerobic exercise zone without being in zone 2.
Okay.
Like when I go for a run, I might be zone 4. Yeah. It's still probably not the most effective way for me to exercise anymore, but it's a little more intense than zone 2. It's kind of that messy middle where I think a lot of women have exercised for a long time, where we know as we age, it's just not as effective for maintaining our muscle mass and maintaining our lean mass as the either polarized cardiovascular training, like we talk about, either doing something that is truly zone 2 and then pushing it into that anaerobic window, or doing the resistance training.
But it is still, from the dopamine, serotonin, like it is still like your soul food. You run at zone 4 because it feels good to you. Because it feels good mentally, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And I just know that I just don't do it. It's not as big of a component of my exercise routine as it used to be.
Yeah.
But it's still definitely needed, and I still feel great when I do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
that's okay. So exercise category there. And then, so we touched a little bit about this. So in the world of movement, the examples we keep hearing about, like, thousands of years ago, millennia ago, we moved all day, every day. So that's the idea behind movement is we were never designed as a physiological machine that we are with humans to sit all day, which is what we all do now. So the idea of movement is walking the dog, sure, going on a walk, sure, but more it's set the alarm on your phone or something to get up out of your chair I have some people who do it every 10 minutes, but at a minimum every 30 minutes to move. One of the reasons why I think having a schedule to set for this, because it was a new learning around how your brain actually works, is you go into a different state of brain rhythms and brain waves when you sit over 30 minutes up to 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And so if you can trigger yourself to get up, you re-energize your whole body, but specifically your brain and neurochemistry when you get up and move. So you can get a little bit of movement snacks. Okay, so this idea of moving even throughout the day, we heard about circadian rhythms. We talk about those in sleep, but it's ultradian rhythm, which is you need to move every 30 to 90 minutes, right?
So circadian rhythm, 24 hours.
Okay.
That's our body clock, sleep, wake,
right?
Kind of day, night, similar to diurnal rhythms.
Okay.
Ultradian rhythms are these shorter frequencies, and it's kind of how different organs respond to different pulses in our bodies. There's work that you like to reference around needing to move in a certain time period, and I think I've heard 30 minutes, I've heard 45, 60, 90. So regardless, it's just get up and change your position. Yeah.
So, and I think it's a balance because you hear about how important deep work is, and that's like 2-hour blocks. But even if you're doing deep work, getting up and moving in that 2-hour block is conducive to getting more effective deep work.
Absolutely.
So we talked about exercise snacks, which are like 1 to 3 minute bursts. So when you're getting up, it's disruptive. You're kind of in the zone, but you're still getting up and you're doing like 4 squats or you're doing some push-ups.
And maybe we should call them movements snacks, not exercise snacks.
That's a good idea.
We're going to keep exercise as like a dedicated time period to doing more intense work or more focused work where you're actually focusing on those movements, where these more movement snacks are just to break up the monotony of sitting.
Yes. Yeah. Because that is, I think the analogy we were hearing is that sitting is the new smoking.
Right.
So, okay. So get up and move.
Get up and move.
Okay. So that's movement all day, every day, even on a recovery day, you're moving.
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Correct.
And then the third category, which we blocked, or we grouped a number of things in that category around stability. So it's the flexibility stuff, it's the mobility stuff, and the balance.
Absolutely.
Right?
So let's break those terms down. So when we talk about flexibility, we're talking about the ability of our muscles to stretch over a distance, right? And so that, can we bend down and pick something up off the floor? Can we do things like that? And so we need flexibility in our muscles, our tendons and ligaments to a point, but we're really working on muscular flexibility. Mobility is different. That's taking our joints through their full range of motion.
Okay.
It's connected to flexibility.
That's this stuff.
But that's this stuff. That is, do we
Okay.
warm our hips up correctly, our knees, our ankles? And so we have mobility joints and we have stability joints. And if you look at how our body is organized, they kind of alternate.
Oh, okay. That's a good.
You know, our ankle is a mobility joint,
Right.
our knees a stability joint, our
Okay.
hips are mobility joints, and
Okay.
it goes up and down.
Oh,
And
that's
so, you know, we have friends in this space that have done some great stuff with mobility. So if we
Yeah.
look at the Starrett's work in the Ready
Yes.
State, really great stuff with mobility. And as we age, and I am so guilty of not spending enough time doing this, is doing mobility pre and post those dedicated exercise blocks, especially if we are working on raising the intensity of those blocks.
And it's hard because it's boring, right? It's boring. It doesn't give you immediate feedback. You don't sweat. You don't get dopamine hits. But if you do it, then you have, you know, it's like table stakes for continuing to do
Right.
the workouts. And is it true that you can still do some of this mobility work if you forgot it? You can still do it sitting around, you know, after
Absolutely.
a work day at work or in the kitchen. You can do, you know, sort of moving the hips around and all that
Absolutely.
stuff. Just
Yep.
still get points for that.
For sure. 100%. I give points for any type of movement.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, it's interesting as I go into different places where I exercise, I see us all starting to do these things just as like when I go to take my HIIT class, as we arrive, you see all these people all of a sudden doing all of this mobility work.
Yeah.
You know, they're not just statically stretching anymore. They're really trying to warm up those joints, and it becomes really important for injury prevention.
It does, because we'll talk about this in another episode, but the whole like frozen shoulder during menopause and postmenopause, you know, hip replacements, knee replacements, shoulder replacements, those become common occurrences in your 50s to 65. And so trying to either support recovery or, you know, delay or prevent is that mobility work.
Absolutely. And then balance. And we know how devastating falls are and the morbidity associated with falls.
Yes.
And so really working on balance work. This we get from yoga, we get it in Pilates. You can do it while brushing your teeth, you know, standing on one foot, then standing on the other. One of our goals is efficiency. And so I'm really bad at doing flexibility, mobility, and balance work. I just don't prioritize it as much as I should. So I try to do single leg deadlifts.
Yes.
So I'm lifting something heavy and working on my balance at the same time. And so maybe I can't go quite as heavy if I'm doing a little more balance work, but I just alternate these things around because I know I sometimes won't go back and do it.
Yes. And I think two other little tips we got, because I love the efficiency. We both do. We're like, we only have so many hours in the day. And it depends. You got to pick the right exercise, but also closing your eyes.
Oh,
If
absolutely.
you close your eyes on those deadlifts, it's a whole nother kicker in working your balance and your kind of neuro alignment. And then I didn't realize how important the cool down was. Like I'm so guilty of blowing off the cool down.
Yep.
Like I got to go, I got to get to carpool, whatever.
Yeah.
But the research has come out that shows that when you do a 5-minute cool down, it tells your brain to seed what you've just done. And so it's like the equivalent of getting a 30% efficiency kicker on the 45 minutes you just put in.
Yeah.
Which was a totally different rationale for me to take the 5-minute cool down. Otherwise, I was like, I don't really need to cool down. I'll cool down in the car. That doesn't tell your brain what you're doing. And then your brain, therefore, doesn't log what you just did in the right category.
I think it goes back a little bit to that athlete mindset where we stop considering ourselves athletes at some point and we just think of this as kind of a to-do on our list. And if you look at any really high-level athlete, they warm up and they cool down. And it's just as important to their actual, whether it's their competition or their training.
Yep.
And we start to forget that.
Yeah, or just cut corners.
Absolutely.
And we don't have the luxury of having our full day dedicated
Right.
to it. So it's like finding the rationale that it doesn't need to be a 30-minute cool down, like what you did when you were actually in a competitive sport. It's the 5 minutes.
Right.
It's a big one. Okay, so we've talked strength. We've talked exercise, which is strength and cardio, polarized cardio, and zone 2. We talked movement, which can also zone 2 can fall into that category as well. We've talked about stability, and then the fourth one, recovery.
And this again is something that I think we tend not to prioritize. And I think as we transition from what might have been really consistent patterns of movement, you know, when after college, when I stopped playing competitive sports and kind of became more of a runner, that was my consistent exercise for 20 years.
Yep.
And now as I know it's not as effective for me to still do that from a body composition, lean muscle mass perspective. As I transition into lifting heavier weights, doing more polarized cardio, sprinting more, doing more HIIT, I know my body needs longer to recover. And I was probably even between my runs, not giving my body long enough time to recover.
Yeah.
And so I think really saying, okay, accepting that movement is so important, that a recovery day that incorporates movement is vital to you being able to reach the intensities that you need on your hard days. And if you really want to push that body composition change and getting to those intensities, you have to give yourself time to recover.
Okay, so I think embedded in that, A, yes, we have to recover. It's a little bit like warm up, cool down. You have to do it. B, you've talked about the science about why recovery is so important. Like if you have too much stress on your system, then you don't actually, your brain doesn't actually invest in building the muscle tissue because it's trying to conserve energy and trying to diffuse stress.
Yes.
Right. So you have to have that recovery so your brain knows it's okay to go to work to rebuild. And then C, you talk about the idea of being able to move on a recovery day, which I love because I get antsy. So recovery doesn't mean you're laying around in your bed all day if that doesn't feel good. It certainly means that if that's what feels good to you. That is 100% okay. But if you're like, hey, today's a recovery day, Jen wants to go on a hike, I can't do it, it's recovery. No, yes, you can.
Yeah.
That falls into recovery day.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay, I love that.
Yeah. So I think that's why we want to separate out kind of our really dedicated exercise time from recovery.
Okay.
And, it's funny because I know sometimes depending on, I still love to go run with friends. And it's like, I have some friends when I run with, it is definitely a workout day. And I have some friends when I run, I'm like, this is more of a recovery fun day.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you can definitely mix and match.
Yeah. And you have some friends that can't run with you. It's still a recovery day.
No, it's great. But, so let's talk about why we're wearing what we're wearing.
Oh yeah. So these would be enhancements. We talked a little bit about the weighted vest as one of them. And the reason why we want to bring these up is in the world of efficiency. There's some things that are easy to add in if you like them. Great. You get a little more oomph with a lot less effort. So that's one of them. And we got a couple more we'll talk about. But why do we wear weighted vests?
So I think this whole idea came from the military and the idea of rucking. So, historically, mostly men in the military wore weighted packs and walked for a really long time. So that is now transitioned outside of the military into a form of exercise called rucking. And it is doing kind of low impact work with extra weight. So, we're weighted vests that kind of distribute that weight more evenly. You can get a traditional ruck, which is just a fancy weighted backpack, which puts more weight kind of backwards on you, like wearing a heavy backpack. So you can take a normal backpack and put some cans in it. This doesn't have to be fancy. I think the idea is, especially for women, helps with posture. It's really hard to slouch when you're wearing these. It's really uncomfortable. It also loads bones that are technically really hard to load in the gym. So it's loading your spine a little bit, which we know is so important for women as we age, to have that multi-directional stress on our bones to avoid osteoporosis and osteopenia. And so wearing these can just add a little more resistance. It actually increases the aerobic intensity of what you're doing by carrying more weight. And so without increasing the kind of jarring on your joints. So it can take a brisk walk to the intensity of a run without having to run.
Yeah, which I love that. Is I wear this in the gym. So if we go to the Bow Collective or you go to any of your group exercise classes, if you wear this, you get bigger bang for the buck when you're lifting and when you're doing cardio, which I love. I wear it around the house. I'm just like doing my little movement snacks now, not exercise snacks. I don't wear it on the golf course because I really have a hard enough time with my swing anyway without weight. And I wear it e-biking, but I don't wear it when I'm cycling because it's a little bit leaning over. I do know that this company makes tanks and bike pants so that you could do that if you're cycling, but you just got to feel your way.
And I don't wear mine if I'm doing like high intensity sprint work. I tried to run in one once and for me, it just was not comfortable. I think, there are some guidelines. You definitely don't want to start with more than 10% of your body weight. At max, you probably want to do no more than 20 to 25% of your body weight. So again, like anything, you want to start slow, build up. Same for distances.
Yeah.
People use them hiking. I think you, again, have to get used to it because it does change your center of gravity a little bit, can change the way you're moving a little bit. But I wear mine when I walk the dogs. We love to wear them hiking. If we decide to go for a hike instead of a trail run, it definitely increases the cardiovascular intensity.
Well, I love it because you and Mike wear them together. And I don't know, everybody has different things they do with their partner. But in some ways, hiking is not enough of a stressor for Chris when he and I go. But if he's wearing something, that amps the cardio feedback loop, and it feels like more something we can do together.
Yes.
So there is a little bit of, can you intensify something that you wouldn't normally think of as intense by wearing this, and then maybe do it at the same levels? So
Absolutely.
the other thing about the weighted vest that I think is helpful is that you can, even if you're just sitting like we're sitting in it now with the posture, you can really engage your core. So it does a little bit of everything if it's comfortable while you're wearing it. Okay, now one of the other enhancements that is, I think this is still pretty cutting edge, in the category of things that you can potentially get more bang for your buck, get oomph, and help you in the long run continue activity. The one I'm playing with right now is called BFR.
Okay, which
stands for blood flow restriction.
Okay.
And some people might have heard of this. I think Dr. Peter Tia talks about it. It's kind of making its way around some of the more mainstream podcasts on longevity. And so what it is, like, the thing I think of it as, it's kind of like a blood flow restriction that you might see when you're getting your blood pressure done.
They do look like versions of a blood pressure cuff, for lack of a better description.
Right.
Yeah. A little bit different size for the arm and the leg.
And these, I used these this morning, so I did not actually deflate them all the way, so it doesn't really matter, but they're a little puffy. They don't usually look this puffy. But if you're watching, you can see I'm going to just slide it on my arm. And it kind of goes like over your, over your bicep and under your shoulder. Same thing with your leg, kind of over your thigh. And the intent is you wear them while you're working out, either lifting weights or cardio, for a more intense impact or efficacy with less effort.
Okay. So for your arm one, you put it kind of right below your shoulder. So the idea is that you're working bicep, tricep harder?
Well, it's basically your entire body. So what it's trying to do is restrict blood flow, and it's doing it through your limbs. But that impacts, and you'll be able to explain as a doctor more, but it impacts obviously all of your blood flow, right? Because your blood is flowing through your whole body. So even, it helps in your core.
Right.
And the idea behind it is, with blood flow restriction, we talked about this a little bit in our foundational episode, and we maybe want to have a whole episode on what exercise is doing in your brain, as well as what it's doing in your muscles, and why, they're obviously interrelated. But the idea with blood flow restriction is you're telling your brain that you're having a more intense effect on your muscles than you typically would be if you were just lifting heavy weights, because you're restricting the blood flow. It's making your body work harder and produce more lactic acid, which is letting your brain know that it needs to have human growth hormone created and that you're working a lot harder. So your brain doesn't actually figure out how long that is. It just figures out how much of that activity is happening and starts to calibrate with that activity.
Got it.
Right? So it's a way, and the reason I'm exploring it is I'm a big fan of lift heavy. I've been lifting heavy for 5 or 6 years, and my metrics are solid. Like, I've got good body comp. I've got good, all the stuff you'd look at. However, I am 55, and I am intending to do this kind of a workout for 40 years. And I'm curious about a technology that might allow me to have that effect without the same impact on my joints. Lifting heavy. So that's the reason to explore it. The genesis for the technology was out of Japan, right? So it was a scientist who was working with an elderly population in Japan. No surprise, there's a higher percentage of elderly people in Japan. And he was working with them to help build back muscle and try to show that he could reverse the effects of sarcopenia, of muscle decline and decay. And he had huge success. And so the Japanese swim team took it in and started to work with it with young athletes and saw the same kind of effects. So it's come on mainstream. I think I want to say it's been around in the mainstream conversation for 15 years. And so different technologies and bands are being released. The one that I'm working with has a bunch of credibility and research behind it. And then the woman who's kind of guiding on this is working specifically with how this works with midlife women. So I'm curious about it for us.
Yeah.
But I'm also curious about it for my mom, right? She's 83. The idea that I'm going to ever get her lifting, 20-pound weights and bicep curls like I do, no. I'm also curious with my father-in-law. He's trying to recover from a stroke. So my intent with doing it, as in our world of laboratories, we do ourselves on things, is I'm starting out relatively strong. And if I can see improvements without lifting heavy and doing these bands, I feel like there's a case that can be made for people to take this on and be able to get the effects of lifting heavy without maybe some of the joint load and a little bit of the trepidation that a lot of women have for lifting heavy.
Right. So, and I think the other interesting, and I'm just kind of brainstorming out loud here. I don't know that if there is actually, the science around this is relatively new. We're learning so much more about lactate as a really powerful fuel for the brain. Lactate is one of the few substances that can cross our blood-brain barrier. And we're even looking at lactate infusions for people recovering from traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
And so it is interesting to see, and I don't know if this is part of the study that you're engaged in. Are you measuring lactate levels while you're doing this?
You know what? I think she's got a protocol to do that, but I'm not there physically.
Got it.
So, maybe I should ask how I can do that here remotely. I know a doctor.
Yeah, because I do think
maybe I should do that.
I do think it is interesting. Is that going to enhance the cognitive effects and kind of the neurosignaling of this type of exercise?
Yeah. So we'll see. So I think there's a ton of research out there. We'll link to it in the show notes if people want to get started before the 6 months here. And it's pretty easy to start. It's the only friction is strapping on some bands before you lift weights is an extra 5 minutes. We're close enough to our friends at, the gym where we work out that when I walk into a basically HIIT class with these on, I'm going to get some giggles and grins, but it'll be fine. But it could be something where you want to try it in the privacy of your own home. You don't even need weights though. That's what's great about it. It's really good at enhancing the impact of resistance training and body weight. Right. But for an example, when I'm doing a bicep curl now, I do the 20-pound bicep curl. That's my weight level. When I'm wearing the BFR bands, it's 10 pounds.
Interesting.
I just can't do the same weight.
Yeah.
When I'm squatting, you've been with me. I might be doing 100 pounds in a squat. I mean, if I can do 40,
wow,
I can feel it immediately, and I'm sore the next day. You're not always supposed to be sore from BFR, but whenever I am sore, I think to myself that definitely was some sort of new activity in my muscles. So I'm happy to see it. So that's one. So I think, Jen, this one is one that is still, even though there's years of research behind it, it's still kind of in the experimental stage for mainstream. Now, I feel lucky because I have a friend and colleague who is a menopause doctor. She's the one who put me in touch with this woman who is a certified coach, athlete, very deeply trained in BFR. So, it's something that I would not just pick up some bands or blood pressure cuffs and put on and, rubber band my arms and start trying. Right?
Correct. I think this is one of those emerging technologies that does take some coaching and some supervision, just like all the things we're talking about. When we talk about lifting heavy, if you've never lifted a weight, that doesn't mean you go in the weight room and pick up the heaviest thing you can imagine.
Right.
And not. So it is, it's all a progression of first learning the correct way to move so you don't hurt yourself, then going deeper and expanding on adding resistance, which can start with body weight and building up gradually. So for people who've never been in the gym or never been in the weight room, it could be 6 months until you're picking up heavy weights that we deem heavy.
Oh, yeah.
So it's definitely a progression. And I would definitely say that with the blood flow restriction as well, as if this is a technology that interests you, to find someone, and it is becoming more popular. So there is more emerging locations and coaches that can do this, even virtual coaches, just to make sure that you have it positioned right, you're not leaving them on too long, etc.
And there are some conditions where it's not appropriate.
Right.
The other thing that I would think of as an enhancement that's relatively low cost and easy to do is heat. So we hear a lot about people wanting to do yoga in heated environments or wanting to do saunas after they work out. So there is a role that heat can play in intensifying a workout.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful with heat. So I think we become less heat tolerant as we get older. Going for a run in the hottest part of the day is probably still not advised.
That sounds not fun.
Yeah.
Too. Yeah.
It's still pretty dangerous.
That's not the fun category.
I think using heat after a workout is really effective. And I think there's good data to say that it prolongs that we're going to use the word exercise mimetic again. So it can prolong some of the benefits of your workout if you sauna after, especially for women. So I think heat could be used that. The hot yoga, yes, it increases the intensity. Again, I think you need to be careful.
For us, when I say us, I mean, when I was trained in yoga, we had a yoga studio and I was pretty far down the mastery training in yoga. And in that community, heat and yoga are really regarded in two camps. So if you're a believer that you generate your own heat, and that's what your internal fire is all about, and that's the yoga practice that I was trained in. So the vinyasa flow is to generate heat internally so that you then have the external sweating and data that you have heat. So that's kind of the tradition that I was raised in and trained in. However, I've also practiced yoga in hot studios and I definitely feel good and I sweat a ton. And, the only thing I would flag as a yoga teacher in that is to watch how much you believe your own body's response to the heat as an increased flexibility signal. Because you can really overstretch and overtrain in the heat because the external heat has relaxed you and released more than your body is actually ready for. So you can injure yourself in that heat. Now, that being said, again, I love sweating and I have a hard time sweating if I'm not in heat. So I go there for that, but I actually, in my mind, I'm always thinking, am I really this deeply in the stretch or am I overstretching? Because the heat is kind of tricking me into thinking I'm not relaxed.
Right. And so I think, if you're doing things in heat, just make sure you're hydrating before, during, things like that. We know exercising outside in the heat can be pretty dangerous. So just be careful when you're doing that. But using sauna afterwards can be very effective for keeping that increased blood flow to those muscles, for really allowing those adaptations to take place.
Yeah. So you said hydrating, and I know electrolytes while you're hydrating, but what that reminded me of was sort of the last level. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this episode, but it is potentially an enhancement to exercise, and that's how you fuel pre and post. So I'm sitting here drinking this drink while we're talking because I did do a BFR workout right before we got to do our podcast, and I'm trying to make sure I put the protein in right after. So tell us a little bit about why that protein and how much, and why that helps you get more efficacy out of your workout.
Absolutely. So again, as we start to go through midlife and we start to lose our hormonal influence, especially of estrogen, we have to have different ways of signaling to our bodies that we're ready to handle this stress and that this is a good stress and it's an anabolic stress and we want to build lean muscle after this stress. And so one way we can do that is with fueling. And so having some fuel pre-workout, especially if we're doing a resistance training workout, having some protein on board. And then within the hour, at most 90 minutes after a workout, making sure we get 30 grams of protein. And that really does signal to our body, this is okay to build. It's okay to repair and to do those adaptations. I am not in a starvation state. I'm not in this high stress state anymore. I can actually conserve this energy, build lean muscle versus doing the opposite.
Awesome. A lot of times I can't get a solid in. So having a protein shake, I know it's processed because it's, on a shelf, but that's better than nothing is what I'm understanding. Okay. All right. Awesome.
Absolutely. And then let's go back and touch on cold really quick, because I think this is, with all the excitement about cold plunging and this and that, how do we use it if we are recreational exercisers?
Yes.
So I think this is an important area to explore, because if you're in the gym or at home working hard to build lean mass, jumping into a cold plunge right after is actually not super beneficial.
And I love that you raised this, because I think a lot of us hear about cold plunging and we try it. It's, we're having a whole episode on cold exposure, but our memory is when we were athletes or professional football players, professional athletes are icing down after their big game. The way that I started to understand this is they're doing that because they need to recover to go perform again really quickly. And so they're trying to stop the muscle breakdown. They're trying to stop the inflammation so they can go back out and compete again. But when we lift weights, we're trying to allow that inflammation to happen, and we're trying to allow that muscle breakdown to happen so that it repairs. So if we stop it, we've sort of blunted what we just invested 45 minutes doing. Right.
So we want those adaptive changes. So that is the difference. So the best research we have around cold is in the idea of DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness. And so we know it's really effective at preventing that. And so if you are an athlete, and it doesn't matter what level, if you're in a competition, let's say you're getting ready for a race, or you're in a pickleball tournament and you have back-to-back-to-back games and you don't want to be as sore, absolutely, that's a great time to use cold. My kids use it if they're in tournaments and they have 2 or 3 games a day. That's a great time to use it. But for us who go to the gym to try to use that positive stress to make adaptations, to build lean muscle, going in and preventing and short-circuiting that inflammatory cycle is not productive.
Which is a little bit of a tactical how-to then, because we're lucky enough to be able to access both a sauna and a cold plunge in close proximity to where we work out. So what I was thinking I was going to do is I'm going to lift heavy, and then I'm going to do the sauna, and then I'll do the cold plunge. But that actually is not the ideal setup. I just spent a bunch of time lifting heavy, and then I accentuated it with the sauna, and then I stopped it and put the brakes on it with the cold. So what I do now instead is I either do a cold plunge on the day when I'm not lifting heavy, or I'm not doing a big intense sprint interval training for my cardio, which is the same muscle thing that's going to grow, or I wait and do that cold plunge within 12 hours of the workout, which is a little bit, it's hard because you're just like, all right, I'm working out at maybe 6 a.m. A cold plunge right before dinner doesn't feel natural.
Right.
But that's more when I try to schedule my week, which is never what I actually end up doing. I just try to schedule it and make it up as we go. I'm mindfully going, all right, cold plunge before I go lift weights, or cold plunge in the evening, not too close to bedtime.
Right.
And it also jacks dopamine, which you want to do, So it's a little bit of the Jenga with the clock.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, how do you make a schedule?
Let's do it. I love schedules.
And I think this is hard.
Yes.
Right. I think we're busy. And again, I would promote the 80-20.
Yes.
If we get this right about 80% of the time, it's a huge win.
Yes.
So let's talk about like a weekly schedule, and then talk about more kind of periodization over a longer term.
Okay. Maybe like a season.
Yeah.
Like a quarter or something.
Yeah.
Because I think when we talked about our 4 categories, right, which was exercise, really intense something in the day, movement all through the day. We talked about the stability components, and then recovery. So exercise, if we break it down into strength training, like lift heavy stuff, and then intense cardio, so not zone 2, that polarity cardio, what do we think are kind of rules of thumb for people to put into their weekly schedule? They're just trying to target how many times of the strength and how many times of the polarized cardio.
I think minimum 2.
2 of each. Yeah.
Yep. At minimum.
And max
4.
4. Yeah.
I mean, you have to have the recovery time, because I think the goal in that polarized training is to hit those intensities. And unless you are recovering appropriately, we can't hit those intensities. And so I would say 2. And I think it also depends on what is your availability. So I know I have kind of repurposed some of what I was already doing to be able to accomplish this, just because it might be access to equipment.
Yeah.
So, if I only have access to weights twice a week or 3 times a week, and I can do some sprinting on those days, I've combined those together. And then my other days are either my long cardio, which I still do, or a different type of recovery day. Maybe it's a hike with a ruck. Maybe it's something, maybe it's just full recovery, which is I do a little mobility and walk my dogs.
Yeah. So I love the way you described that. And I'm going to give the term that you used for me that always made it accessible for me. Because we would go into, let's say we go into our HIIT class and stacking, right? Stacking. So it's 20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes of lifting heavy and 20 or 25 of sprint. That you can do that in a 45-minute class or an hour class. I know a lot of our conversation, our audience here maybe goes to a gym like the Bow Collective or like Orange Theory or like F45. And all of those places now have trainers who understand that people are working through their own routines. So you don't have to follow the script. If you want to do stacking and do lift heavy and do sprint training, or do just a sprint training day, you have now the information to execute that in the environment you like, because the equipment's there, the music's there, the community's there. So it doesn't need to be only do these things in the perfect environment to do them. You can configure the workout in the environment you like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that's important. And then I think it is important to prioritize your recovery days as well, to make sure that that's happening. And, most of us wear some sort of device that kind of gives us a recovery score if we're tracking what we're doing. And how accurate they are can vary, but the trend is important.
Right.
And I think you can use some different metrics, whether you track your HRV, whether you track the time to recovery after a certain workout, and kind of help that to adjust the intensity and the frequency in which you're doing things.
So on the exercise, 2 to 4 times of strength and polarity cardio, that's sort of the goal. It doesn't have to be 4 of each, right?
No.
It's like 2 to 4, put it together. And then on the move side, there's the movement snacks, and then there's the zone 2 can fall in one of those days. What about on the mobility stuff and stability?
So, a lot of people are starting to do that mobility and stability work as warm up and cool down. And I think that's really important. We know our fascia and things get stiffer and less flexible as we age. And so really moving that around before we go into those intense workouts is really important.
Okay.
And so I think that mobility, stability, a little bit of balance work should be probably incorporated 7 days a week if we can.
Okay. And then recovery, because I always think of recovery and I'm trying to say, okay, there's recovery when I'm lifting weights in the set, right?
Right.
And there's the recovery between sprint intervals. And then there's recovery from you did a really hard weight day on a body part. It's a leg day. How long do you recover till the next leg day?
I would say at least 24 hours.
Yeah. If not 48. It's like, I mean, you got to give it. Because if you want to work out hard enough that you're doing all that stimulant in the brain and the muscle, that means like a 2-day recovery. Right. So,
right. And I think once people get really into this, it's harder than it like to push those intensities. And I know I sometimes don't reach those intensities as often as I should. It's working up to that and then kind of getting that feedback. Okay, that was hard enough that I really do need to recover. And then I think we have to think things in a bigger picture too, that, maybe we do this week schedule for 3 or 4 weeks, and then we mix it up for a week. And sometimes this falls naturally in rhythms of vacation or travel or things like that, holidays. Yeah. But oftentimes it can also just be, you just start to feel like you can't hit the intensities that you're doing. And it's not that you're not strong enough. It's not that you're not working hard enough. Maybe that you've overdone it actually. And you just need to give yourself a week of something totally different, which is also good for your body. It's good for your mind to just say, I'm going to swim this week. Or I'm going to try something new. I'm going to play pickleball instead. I'm going to walk on the golf course. Just something different. Doesn't mean you're not moving, but just shifting the intensity loads, shifting your environment a little bit before you get back into your solid routine.
Yep. I love that. It gives us permission to just downshift a little bit. The other part about recovery that I find myself thinking about is any kind of exercise or workout can be recovery. Yeah. Any kind of exercise or workout can be intense. And so you can go to your yoga class and it can be recovery, or you can go to it with, a different level of intensity you're bringing to it. And it could be strength training. Yeah. Or it could be cardio. Same thing with Pilates. It's not every exercise type fits into one of these blocks. Right. It's your decision to execute it with the intensity or the intent that you want.
Yeah. I think, sometimes we have a plan and our bodies are just not cooperating. And that's okay. And I think we need to listen to that. This is our friend Stacy Sims. It's one of her, I listen to a lot of her work. I think she's absolutely brilliant. One of the things she says is this 10-minute rule that, you have your workout plan and you just maybe get up and you just don't feel great. Well, try it for 10 minutes. And if you're not able to do what you need to do, just regroup. Make it an extra recovery day. Like, pushing through is not always the answer. Yeah. Like, we can't make that decision every day, but there are days, I look at my house this week, everybody's just a little run down. And I got up this morning and I had a plan and I'm like, one, that doesn't sound motivating. It sounds like it's going to be a chore, not something I'm going to enjoy. And I went to go start to do it and I'm like, not today. Yeah. And I think giving yourself that grace to say every once in a while, not today, is important.
Yeah, very important. And I will say, your plan of not today, mine was, I'll sleep an extra hour. It does happen. Like, I'm just exhausted. I need this. The other part that I think is a good kind of release in our have-tos and must-do mentality that we need to unhook from is, you're trying to string together habits. It is better to do a habit halfway that day than just skip it all together. Yeah. You showed up for 10 minutes. Check the box. Ring the bell. You kept a string. That's perfect right there. So that's a great way for us to think about it. Okay, so as we wrap it up, what would we kind of say? All right, just listen for this next minute and take these messages home.
Right. So we have our exercise component of our movement, right? And that is dedicated. We're focused on building lean mass, improving fitness or maintaining fitness. That is our strength training, dedicated strength training, dedicated sprint interval training, dedicated HIIT training, or our truly dedicated aerobic work that we're doing.
And that can be 20 minutes. Doesn't have to be 2 hours.
Correct.
20 minutes, 45 minutes. That block of time in your day is tight.
Yes. Yeah. And then we have movement, which is a lifestyle that is incorporated into our day. We use our movement snacks. This is also our really kind of low intensity things like walking our dogs, all of these extras that all contribute to longevity and living a healthy life.
And remembering that you have this movement rhythm, like you have a circadian rhythm, and it's 30 to 90 minutes. So triggering yourself to get up, even though it feels disruptive if you're in a flow state, better for your brain, much better for your body, because sitting is the new smoking. Right. So getting up.
And then we have what we need to keep ourselves healthy, to avoid injury, to recover from injury, and to be able to keep doing all the things we want to do. We need to work in some mobility.
Yep.
So that's moving our joints through their full range of motion. We need to work in some flexibility to make sure our muscles can adapt to our changes in position. And we need definitely to work on our balance.
I like that. And with eyes open or closed to get little bonus points.
Yes.
Okay, and then the one that becomes more and more my favorite.
Our recovery.
Recovery, yes. Awesome.
So we need to make sure we give our bodies time to process the stress that we've put it under and adapt the way we want them to, which is positively, by building lean muscle, increasing our strength.
Okay. So when you're programming your week, you start with recovery first because you need to make sure you program it in. The stability stuff is just a little bit every day. You don't have to do 2 hours of stability work. It's a little bit every day. And then the movement stuff is daily, coming in a little bit throughout the day. And exercise 2 to 4 times, lifting heavy or something that's really strong muscle build for strength building. And then 2 to 4 times, something that's more intense cardio building. So I think of those as building activities that are intense, and so they're short and sweet, and you build the recovery in between when you build those different things.
Yeah, and kind of a way, this is somewhat a weird analogy you can think of it, is like those high intensity days is almost like the light switch off on. You're either on or you're off. And so it's like when you're working so hard, but then you take a break till you recover, till you turn it on again. And those kind of longer aerobic days are kind of like having a dimmer. Where it's a little more gradual, right? You can go up and down a little bit. So, yeah.
Awesome. And then we got some great resources and partners that we draw upon. We've got them all in the show notes, but maybe we just want to fire them off so people are listening and don't want to read the show notes.
Absolutely. So I think, especially if you are very athletic woman or still competing in different types of athletic events, I think checking out all of Stacy Sims' work is it's really geared towards athletes, and she has some great stuff there.
Yes. And I would say, even though I'm not an athlete, I love Stacy's work because it's aspirational for if I want to train harder, how do I do it?
Right.
So
I think Gabriel Lyon has really come in with some great research. She has a great podcast, really informative books on building muscle, the importance for that from a longevity standpoint. I think she focuses a little more on the longevity aspects of things.
She does. And I think her moniker for it, muscle-centric medicine, helps kind of underscore you're building muscle with all of these categories of activity that we've talked about. So she's a great resource. And she also ties the nutrition tightly in with protein.
Yeah. I think our friends, the Starretts, Juliet and Kelly, they wrote The Ready State, which is all about mobility and how to work that in. They talk about how important it is to sit on the floor, to be able to get up and down, and how doing a lot of these functional movements incorporate into what we want to be doing later in life.
Yep. Awesome. I know our friend and partner, Anissa Buckley, does a great job on Untethered. Be Untethered, I think is her website. But she comes at it from much more menopause and postmenopause activity levels, as well as adventure movement, which is a part of the enjoyment factor as well, and the nutrition tied to it. And then Ashley Selman, Selly Strength is her platform. If you want to go learn more, is the BFR expert.
Awesome.
Yay.
Well, so fun. And we'll be back next time with some more information on movement with a deep dive in some of these areas.
Yes. And now we're off to move.
Yep. Take care.
So, thank you.
As always, what a gift for you to have spent your time with us. Thank you. As we get into the new year, we've got one more episode left that'll drop. We will, as so many people are, we will talk about mindset and getting powered up for your 2025. But our filter will be on very simple, science-backed practices that you can pick and choose from to be able to set yourself up to get what you want out of 2025. It's time. If you liked what you heard and you got some tips on how to live better right now and for the long haul, please help us reach more midlife women. Please share and rate and like this show. And we can't wait to continue the dialogue with you on our next episode. Until then, thank you. It's time.